Hello Kerbinauts, and welcome to my Let's Play series where we follow the history of spaceflight and have our own adventures with Kerbal Space Program. Today we're playing with the demo version of Kerbal Space Program. I have the full version of the game, and I will use it when our goals get a little more complex. But in the meantime, we're going to see how far into the history of spaceflight we can go with just the demo version, so everyone can play along at home. Today we're starting our adventure in 1944 with the V-2 rocket. This simple rocket was the first time humans really started to understand the mechanics of space travel, and although it was originally used for very destructive purposes, the technology used in these rockets paved the way for the spaceflight we have today. So what really makes this a technological achievement is the altitude this rocket was able to achieve. It was the first time that a human-made device was able to enter what we now consider space. When we look at the atmosphere of the Earth, we can see that what we normally consider to be our atmosphere is about 100 kilometers. And that's quite a ways. Now, the height of the V-2 rocket was 220 kilometers, so we're about double what we would normally consider the Earth. Now, within the Kerbal Space Program game, the planet is much smaller and it has a much lower atmosphere. So what we're going to look for is where the atmosphere actually stops on the planet Kerbin, which is where we're going to be. In the game it's around 70 kilometers. And so what we'll want to do is try to make a rocket that reaches 140 kilometers. So here we are within Kerbal Space Program. This is the demo version again. But what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and start game. And I'm just going to choose to start a new game. We'll call it demo, that's fine. Alright, so here we are in the planet Kerbin. Again, it's about 1/6 the size of Earth. Its atmosphere stretches out to 70 kilometers instead of about 100 kilometers for the Earth. And we've got a few options here. We can click on our tracking station, that's fine. That'll show us everything that's going on. We don't have any flights in progress or anything orbiting the planet right now, so there's nothing to look at there. The launch pad, we'll get there pretty soon. And then the vehicle assembly building, which is where rockets are built. And then our spaceplane hangar. Now the spaceplane hangar, when I try to click this, it says demo version is not available. That's fine. We'll get around to building space planes in a little while. We've got a few basics to cover off on first. So I'm going to enter the vehicle assembly building. And again, our goal is to build a V-2 rocket, or similar, looking to the V-2 anyway, that will reach 140 kilometers. Now the demo version of Kerbal Space Program only gives you one command pod. And while the V-2 wasn't manned, we don't really have much of a choice. This is a one-person command pod that we'll be using. We're just going to pretend there's no one in there. Now the demo version of this game is great because you can figure out all of your technical specifics and figure out all your strategies, and there's really a limited number of parts, so it keeps it very simple. First of all the parts are listed up here on the left and they're categorized. The first tab was the pod. We only have one choice. So the second one here is our propulsion tab. We've got gas tanks and engines and fuel lines and all of that. Controls. So these are stability controls. You can think of these as gyroscopes. And then you've got some structural. So this is a stand to hold the rocket on the launch pad. That's fine. A few other collars and things that we won't get into today. A few aerodynamic devices, nose cones and wings. A few ladders and lander legs. We certainly don't need those yet, but we will soon. And then the science tab is empty on the demo version. Alright, so let's get started. Now the demo version makes things easy because the three engines you have are all liquid engines, and you only have liquid fuel tanks up here. This is a booster rocket, a solid fuel booster rocket, much like on the space shuttle, where once you light it off it doesn't stop until it runs out of fuel. But we won't need that today. The V-2 certainly did not have booster rockets. So our two choices here, one is called the FLT 400 and the FLT 800. Not really that important, but when you look at it, the stats in the second box from the bottom says resources. And between liquid fuel and oxidizer, it shows us that we have about 400 units of fuel. Okay, so the FLT 400 has 400 units of fuel. And in the same way, the 800 has 800 units of fuel. I'm going to start out with the 800 unit and just attach it. And I just click it and drag it over. I can remove it if I need to, and you can see the mount points automatically appear, and it snaps into place. No big deal. I can move this rocket up and down, use my mouse scroll wheel to go up and down, and when I hold the shift key and move my mouse scroll wheel, I can zoom out and in. For the bigger rockets, it's helpful to be zoomed out. So now that we've got fuel, I need an engine. And we're going to go ahead and grab an engine. Now what's the difference between these? Well, the LVT-30, the LVT-45, okay, and the LV-909. Now the number in the title isn't really as helpful as when we were looking at the fuel tank, so you have to look at that second box from the bottom with all the stats in it. So first of all, let's look at the first entry. Engine max power 215. Great. Engine max power 200. Okay. And engine max power 50. So if I were to choose between the 215 and the 200, why wouldn't I always choose the 215? Well, if we look at the 200, you can see there's one entry, second from the bottom in that same section. It's called thrust vectoring. Now certainly the V-2 didn't have thrust vectoring, and what that means is that the nozzle on the bottom of the rocket can turn itself, and that helps turn the rocket. But this is stationary, so we're alright, so let's grab the bigger of the two standard engines here, the 215 max power engine. I'm just going to attach it on the bottom. Great. Now I am missing a few things, and they were the wings on the V-2, so we're going to add some wings on ours. I'm going to click on the aerodynamic tab, and then I get a few options. So here's a nose cone, okay, but when I try to add the nose cone, you'll see, well, that doesn't really work too well. So this is something in Kerbal Space Program that you have to watch, is that there's different things that are different sizes, different radiuses. So there's very gigantic fuel tanks in the full game that you definitely don't want to attach just to the bottom of a pod like this without some sort of adapter to make it work. I'm not going to use this nose cone. But what I will do is I'll come over here to the utility section, and I'm going to grab a parachute. Now I'm not planning on using this parachute. Certainly the V-2 didn't have a parachute, it had a warhead. But it makes it look nice, and it'll help us out with a little bit of a lesson in staging in a little bit. So again, I'm going to come back to the aerodynamics tab, and I have my choice between wings. Now this basic winglet, okay, it's just a fin, and then I have this more advanced winglet, and this is certainly the type of thing that would be on the V-2 rocket. It would be a winglet that helps you steer the rocket through the air, at least when it's still in the atmosphere. So I'm going to grab this and just put it on the rocket. You can see I can put it anywhere. So I'll just stick it on there, okay. Now the V-2 had 4 fins, so I'm going to put a second fin on here. Great, that looks about right. Except it's not. Now I would want these to be 90 degrees. So I could come in here and grab this fin, try to attach it. That's about 90 degrees, it looks okay. But if we come back, we've got problems. And this is one lesson that you'll learn very quickly in Kerbal Space Program. It is very realistic, where things need to be symmetrical, things need to be balanced, because if I try to fly this rocket through the air like this, the flight path is going to be pretty unpredictable. I'm turning the rocket from the middle of the rocket with this wing, from the bottom with this wing, so it's not going to do exactly what I expect it to. That's the main reason you don't see rockets that look like this. So we've made a bit of a mess. I'm going to remove this. I'm just going to click it off here and press the delete key, and now it's gone. I'm just going to set this off to the side for now. This is a good time to point out these 2 buttons down in the bottom left. Angle snap. I'm going to turn that on. Well, see, this goes a long way towards helping me balance out the rocket. Now, instead of being any given angle, it does choose one of a few. But we're going to go even further and say symmetry mode. When I click this, this is a 2 symmetry. And you can see what it does. Makes the rocket perfectly balanced. That's great. And I can come on 3. That's great. But the V-2 had 4, so I'm going to click 4. There, that looks about right. We can see now that looks a lot better. So, we're ready to go out to the launch pad. For those of you familiar with the KSP, you probably already noticed we're going to have a bit of a problem, but it's good to learn. So we're going to title this craft 1944 V-2, and I'll save that. And when I hit launch, we'll go out to the launch pad. Okay, so here we are. You'll see the rocket is resting on its engine on the launch pad. That's how it is by default. That's not great. When we start building larger rockets, the weight of the rocket will break the engine off. So we'll eventually want to go get those stands that we saw earlier. Now I did mention that we were going to have a bit of a problem, and I want to demonstrate what's going to happen here. I'm going to use my shift and control keys here to turn the throttle of the engine up and down. So we're going to set the throttle to 100 for now. And let's go ahead and just press spacebar. Now what's going to happen when you press spacebar is it hits the first stage over on the left here, and you can see we only have one stage. This is a simple rocket, so it only has one stage. But unfortunately my first stage here says kick off the engine and deploy the parachute. Well, what happens when we press space? Well, that wasn't great. So the force of the rocket spinning actually ripped the engine off, which now exploded over there. This rocket is now stuck in the ground apparently, so not a success. Back to the drawing board. So we know that we have a staging problem. What I'm going to do is I'm going to press the plus button here, and now I have another stage. I'm going to take that engine and move it down. So now when I press spacebar, only the engine will light off. And that's great, that's what we want. Now I am going to do one more thing here. I want to show you. When I click on this fuel tank, you can see it moves the entire assembly off. And that's great because then I don't have to rebuild the whole rocket if I decide to add something later. And I am going to add something. We've got these two SAS modules, and basically what they are is they act as a gyro. They'll keep the rocket pointed in the same direction no matter what. So if the rocket's orbiting the Earth and it's pointed at the Sun, when you tell this gyro to start spinning, it's going to keep that rocket pointed at the Sun no matter what. Whether it's behind the planet, in front of it, whatever you want. So we're going to grab an advanced SAS module, because we're doing a bit of testing here and I want to make sure that there's no interference from me, that as we do a few flights here, it's going to be a good test each and every time. So here we go. I'm just going to save this, and we'll go back out to the launch pad. Now, I'm going to turn the throttle all the way up. I'm going to press the T key, and you'll see that lights up the SAS light down here. And we're just going to press space and see how high it flies. Now I'm not going to make you wait until the fuel runs out of this rocket, and this is another point that you want to know in Kerbal Space Program, that as you're flying you can warp, time warp, up here in the top left. So if I click this furthest arrow, we're doing a 4x time warp. You can see a few islands out on Kerbin, some of the mountain ranges behind us, and then where we came from. So I'm going to move it back to regular time, and now we've run out of fuel. Okay, so we're currently at 31 kilometers, 31,000 meters that is, above the Earth, or above Kerbin, sorry. Start to see the stars come out as we exit the air. You can see our moon. And this is a good time to show, when I press the M key, it'll bring up the map. And I can see we're on Kerbin. I can see my spacecraft. I can see where I lifted off. Now you'll notice that I actually lifted off from the Space Center right here. But as time goes on, this liftoff point is moving across the surface. Well, that's because the planet is actually rotating in a counterclockwise direction. So if I were to go high enough, I could actually land right back on the Space Center, because this will start moving in. But as it is, we can see our spacecraft is moving up, and it's still flying higher and higher. It's currently at 79,000 meters. Remember, we're shooting for 140,000 meters, so that's not great. But when I look at this point, it's going to tell me how high this rocket's going to get. It's not possible for the rocket to get any higher than this because we're out of fuel. 98,800 meters. Well, that's quite a ways away from our 140,000 meters that we want to do. So I'm just going to press escape. I'm going to end the flight. Alright, so let's just click restart here. Now I mentioned that Earth's atmosphere is thick, and it definitely is. You can see here on this graph that the lower in the atmosphere you are, the thicker the air is, and as you go higher and higher, the air gets thinner. Certainly if you've ever been to high altitude, you've noticed that you get out of breath faster. There's a lot less oxygen. And what this means for us is that as I fly through the atmosphere, down low it's thick, and pressing through there at 500 meters per second, for example, it's like trying to fly a spacecraft through soup, basically. And that takes a lot of fuel to burn through there. But as I get higher and higher and the air gets thinner and thinner, having that throttle set at 100% works a lot better for me, and I get a lot more fuel economy. So with thin air, with the engine set at 100%, I'm getting a lot more speed and acceleration at 70 kilometers, let's say, than at 0. And certainly the model of Earth carries over to Kerbal Space Program. So when we look at the Kerbin's atmosphere on the wiki, we can see that the optimal velocity at 75 meters, which is the height of the launch center, is about 100 meters per second. That's not very fast. But as I go up, it gets faster and faster. And once we start reaching up past around 10,000 meters and 20,000 meters, and right around 25,000 meters is when things really start picking up. Now anything above 25,000 meters, small things attached to the rocket won't tear off, especially in re-entry. We'll figure that out later. But between 25,000 meters and 70,000 meters, the air really isn't that thick, and that's where we can get a lot of our acceleration from. So I really don't want to use that much fuel trying to push my way through the thick lower atmosphere when it's really not doing me any good. Whether I have the throttle set at 100% or 60%, I'm going to go at the same speed, so why not set it to 60% and save the gas? Now once I get beyond that 25,000 mark and all the way up to 70,000 meters, that's still within Kerbin's atmosphere, but I can really do a lot more good with my engines. And then obviously above 70,000 meters, you're basically in space, and you can do... So here we are back on Kerbin, and I'm just going to move this view around a little bit by holding down the right mouse button. And what we're going to do this time is I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm not going to touch the controls. I'm just going to let the SAS module balance us. I'm going to turn that on by pressing T again. But this time I'm going to set the throttle to about 60%, 2/3 or so. And we'll just take off. So it comes off the pad a little bit slower, but certainly we're still making headway. That's fine. You see now we're reaching 70 meters per second and 80 and 90, and we're still under 1,000 feet. So right here is about the limit of what we can do at 1,000 meters anyway. So we're saving quite a bit of gas, and that's great. I'm going to warp here, and we're just going to leave it at 2/3 throttle until we run out of gas again. And we'll see what happens. Last time at 100% throttle, we got up to 98,000 meters or so. We'll see what happens this time. But it's a good demonstration of how having the throttle set lower can actually get you a lot higher in the atmosphere, because you're doing a lot more good up at those higher elevations. We're coming up into space. KSP sees that we're in space, so it does the space ambiance music, of course. I'm just going to put it back down to regular speed and notice something here. We're at 105,000 meters already, so we've already broken through our 98,000 meter record pretty well. But our goal is 140,000 meters, so let's press the M key again. We'll see where we're at. So close, but that's not quite what we're looking for. 121,000 meters. So by setting that throttle a little bit lower, we saved a lot of gas coming up through the bottom 25,000 meters or so. So now we're back in the vehicle assembly building. Back to the drawing board again, and you'll find that you keep coming back to the vehicle assembly building to tweak things. Now we're just going to give ourselves a little bit more fuel. I'm going to grab this 400 unit tank and attach it, and grab my assembly here. And we'll save it, and we'll go back out to the launch. Okay, so we're back out at the launch pad, and luckily my rocket isn't yet heavy enough to break my engine off, but we'll definitely have to get some of those stands in a little while. You can see we've got the extra fuel tank on here, and what I'm going to do this time is set the throttle again to about 2/3 throttle, and this should do us very well. I'm going to press the SAS again, and we'll launch. I'm going to go ahead and warp us until we run out of gas again. So while we're flying up, I wanted to thank you for watching the first of this series. If you enjoy it, please give it a like and please subscribe. That tells me if people are watching and people like it and that I should continue doing it. I really appreciate it. And again, you know, it's just my love of space and my love of space flight that I want to do this series. I'd really love to inspire someone someday to enter the space industry, or even just to call the representative and say that you'd like more funding to go to organizations such as NASA. So we're just going to enjoy ourselves up in space here. We've already passed through 110,000, 120, 130. Turn time warp back down, and we've met our 140,000 meter goal. We could look down on the planet here. This really is a beautiful game. And thanks for stopping by.